Each of us has a unique career story to tell. For some, these fly high like rocket launches. For others, they're more like the game of chutes and ladders, with advances and setbacks along the way. Either way, we learn countless lessons from these experiences. And that's what we put into the spotlight here at Career Sessions Career Lessons. Join discussions featuring a variety of guests sharing their stories of ups and downs, as well as the secrets of their success and what drives them to continue moving forward. We break down the tools and resources that will help you establish your dream career and realize your professional goals. Here's your host, J.R. Lowry.
Hi, I'm J.R. Lowry, and this is Career Sessions Career Lessons, which is brought to you by Pathwise.io. Pathwise is dedicated to helping you be the best professional you can be, providing a mix of career and leadership coaching, courses, content, and community. Basic membership is free, so visit Pathwise and join today. Today, my guest is Sharon Hull. Sharon is the founder and chief coaching officer of Metta Solutions. She is a trained medical doctor, and she began her career as a solo practitioner in rural downstate Illinois, where she grew up. She then transitioned into academia, working at a variety of institutions in North Carolina, Ohio, and Illinois. And along the way, she began her coaching practice. She earned her bachelor's degree in biology at the University of Evansville, her MD at Southern Illinois University, a master's in public health from the University of North Carolina, and an executive leadership degree in academic medicine from Drexel University. Sharon, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
JR, it's great to be here. I'm excited to get a chance to talk with you, and I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well. So as a Duke grad myself, I have to ask you, you have a history of both Duke and North Carolina. Have you picked a side?
I have to tell you that when I signed my contract at Duke, I asked if I had to pick a side because I told them I had both colors of blue in my closet. They laughed and said, everybody has both colors of blue and you can choose what you want. And so when basketball is playing, I do have my favorite, but I'm a little bit skeptical about saying so, but I'm a Carolina alum. So I got to root for Carolina when the two play each other, but I just like good basketball. How about that?
Fair enough. I used to be probably more passionate, but I used to tell my wife I was going to die of a heart attack in front of a Duke game, but I don't get to watch this. I live in London, so I don't really get to watch so many games anymore because they're usually on in the middle of the night. And, sometimes you can watch the recording, sometimes they're not available, but I miss watching the NCAA tournament. I think I was home for 1 or 2 days of it this year, and it's always great to watch the NCAA tournament when it's on. And I love the ACC tournament too. So
I do enjoy watching it, although I'm not what you might call a diehard fan of any of it. So I just enjoy when I get to watch it.
I gave a quick overview in the intro to the show, but tell us a bit more about yourself and what's keeping you busy professionally.
Sure. I will say what's keeping me busy is my encore career. And I will explain that in the context of kind of a little bit more about myself. I am a retired family physician who has had kind of a circuitous path through medicine. A number of my colleagues got really jaded about medicine many years ago, and I've worked hard not to become that.
Yeah.
So that meant that I got flexible and looked for ways to make my career fit the needs of my life at the moment. I've had a career in solo rural private practice. I have been in academic medicine most of my career. And my encore is to have become a professional executive coach. Those two overlapped for about 10 years. And for the last 2 years, I've been full-time entrepreneuring. My wife says I can't tell you that I'm retired because I'm not.
Yeah.
But I'm in my encore career as a coach.
Yeah.
So looking forward to talking to you about that.
How has that transition gone to full-time coaching?
It's been interesting. I was coaching for the last decade before I retired from academia. And I always knew it would be my retirement plan.
Yeah.
What happened is my chance to do it full-time came about a decade earlier than I expected it to. And Duke allowed me to build an internal program for the faculty at the medical school at Duke. And as we stood that program up, it became apparent to me I was going to have to choose between my clinical life and my coaching life. And for a variety of reasons, the season of my life was that it was time to go all in on coaching. I waited till I had 30 years in medicine before I did that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did. I had a great clinical career, a great academic career, and now I'm having a lot of fun coaching. It's been a good transition.
So given the heritage that you have in working in academic medicine and doing that coaching in your time at Duke, are most of your clients medical professionals, or is your practice branched out since then?
My personal practice has branched out a little bit. I would say I typically coach leaders and people who aspire to be leaders in healthcare, science, and academia in general. So
Okay.
that's a broad list. I do a lot of healthcare professionals and senior leaders in healthcare. But my firm, one of the things that we've done in my transition is like going from being a solopreneur to having a team of coaches. And we work with professionals of all walks of life. And we define professionals in a way that is open to just about anybody who feels that they treat the work they do in the world as a profession. So we coach it. The classic professions of accounting and attorneys and law, medicine and engineering. And we have people in the creative arts, and people who are stay-at-home parents. All of those things can be a profession, and our coaches coach all of them.
And how many of you are there?
There are 25 coaches on my team.
Wow.
And we have a broad range of clientele. All of my coaches have expertise in coaching at the senior professional level, but we coach people at all walks of life.
And you wrote a book.
I did write a book. It's been in the making. I would say most of those 12 or 13 years I've been coaching. It's a distillation of what I think of as my sweet spot in coaching, which is helping people make professional transitions, either of their own choosing or not. And I kept looking for years for the guidebook for that, and I couldn't find one. And I decided after a few years that I could start taking notes, and eventually those notes became a book.
Not a what color is your parachute fan, huh?
I like What Color Is Your Parachute, actually. I think the world is changing, and giving people a toolkit that builds agency, that builds an individual's ability to be intentional themselves, that they can kind of come back to without having to crack a book. Some of it's common sense, but some of it is you need to go figure out, where's the guide about how to do an interview? Or where's the guide if I don't know if it's time to go? Or I wanted those tools out there. But most of the process is thinking through how to communicate with yourself, about yourself, and with others. So I wanted something I could put in people's hands and then meet them where they were. And that's the reason for the book.
So you were obviously thinking about this and decided to distill it. What was the spark that got you down, sitting down in front of the computer and starting to write?
I have to give my wife credit for that. She just said, you keep talking about this and you really like writing. You should just put this down on paper. It took me longer than it should have to listen, but she and a number of friends and colleagues and some of my clients said, are you going to write a book? Where is this going to be? And I finally decided they were right. And then I had to make time and space to do that.
Well, good for you. And the title, Professional Careers by Design, the words by design were included deliberately because you're evoking design thinking.
Yes, that is correct. The idea behind design thinking doesn't come from medicine. It doesn't come from coaching. It really comes from the design industry. And the idea that you try something and go back and tweak it is innate to creators. It's innate to my arts friends. It's innate to my engineering friends. It's innate for a variety of folks, but not the folks I was coaching. Many of them think once they get where they're going, they have to stay there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to create permission, not my permission, but create space for permission to make a change, even if you were deep into a professional career. I think a lot of people think of it as sunk cost, that they went to medical school or went to law school and they just got to stick it out. And what I really wanted to do is invite people to be able to use that training to open doors that mattered to them and to design a life that fit for them.
Yeah. And I mean, certainly, whether you call it job crafting or some of the experiential ways that people will go out and get a sense of whether they would like to do something, sort of like these vacation internships that people will do where they'll go try 2 weeks in a different company and take time off from their current job just to try before they buy, right? I mean, there's, I think, a lot more opportunity to do that. I think there's a lot more acceptance of doing those things. So it's like you've made a decision. It's a life choice. I mean, talk about antiquated.
I think the world of work and the way that we look at work as a society is changing. And you asked what sparked me to put the book together. I have to be honest, in addition to those who personally motivated me, going through the pandemic and watching what was happening with work was fascinating to me. And I watched frontline workers that we called essential workers were defined in a way that I'd never heard society define them. And other people were saying, hey, I don't have to do X. I got to make my life work. I have to homeschool now for my kids and I can't go outside. So what do I really want? And I started hearing that question from my clients. It's like, okay, it's really time to put your thoughts down on paper. The world is shifting. And I think the people who made the decisions during the pandemic, the sort of great resignation folks,
Right.
were the front wave. The essential workers couldn't quit. And that was a different group of people who came to make their changes later when some of the chaos settled down. And I see in the professions and academics that it's still rolling through in a slower way. And so I do think the way that we're looking at whether you have a choice or not is shifting.
And you make the point in the book that this is not the same as a traditional 5 or 10-year career plan. How so?
When I was from as young as in high school, people asked me to map out, well, what do you want to be doing in 3 years? What do you want to do in 5 years? I think in today's world, we can barely see around the corner, let alone see 3 or 5 years down. And I was listening to people in my coaching practice who said, I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 3 months, let alone a year. So I can't even talk about that. How do I even think about this? What I hoped to do with the book, and hope that I have done, is give people a toolkit where they could, no matter what happens, whether we have a pandemic, whether we have a major world conflict, whether climate change is rolling forward, whatever's happening, you could come back to the basic discernment questions in the book and use those as a foundation for making a decision for that moment. And the idea that you have to revisit those decisions regularly, and certainly in a time of crisis, is different than a 3 or 5 year.
I mean, in a way, let's talk about the 3 things that you really kind of the foundational career challenges. In a way, it's sort of like carbohydrates, protein, and fat, right? I mean, everything's made up of those 3 things. And you argue essentially that any career challenge you make up or that you have to face is kind of a mix of discernment and managing change and sort of the lifelong perspective, right? So I just sort of summarized, but maybe give us a little bit more of the detail on that, and then we'll go into each of them.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And you just distilled it right into a single sentence, the whole premise of the book, which is if you're facing a career change, you either are having to figure out what matters, you're having to implement a change, or you're trying to put it all into perspective while you make a decision or while you implement or after you've implemented. And those 3 buckets of tasks are the things I watch clients struggle with. And so it seemed to me important to say, this is not just a guide about how to do an interview. This is about my career is a living, dynamic thing. How am I going to be a steward of it for my whole lifetime? My passion is to get this book in the hands of the youngest possible people in the professions or coming into as trainees. Because if we're giving people tools to think about it from the beginning, it's going to be a lot easier to do it at mid-career or senior career, and people will feel less stuck as they hit those common milestones, right?
Yeah. I think you and I are somewhat aligned in the view that you've got to take ownership for your career. And the sooner you figure that out, the better off you're going to be. Now, you kind of do later in the book, and we'll come to that sort of, your early stage and when you go through that questioning stage and all those different things, on to sort of the encore career and that you're in right now. And, the problems that you face and the way that you think and your life situation will change over the point in time. But there's, a set of tools. If you build that set of tools, as is the case in, in your job, right? Or in many other aspects of your life, if you've got the right tools, you can figure out your way through most things. And I think ultimately that's the piece that really sort of hit with me in looking at the book, that this is ultimately, the way you need to be thinking about it right from the get-go.
I really appreciate how you succinctly summarized it. And I'm thinking why is this book important now? And I've thought about the fact that in my professional lifetime, we've lived through the 9/11 attacks. We've lived through a couple of wars that have involved our country, several wars that have not involved our country, but have impact around the world, and a pandemic. And all of a sudden, you can't write a game plan for that that's 5 years out.
Right.
I think for me, my life experience has said, we have to be more flexible. We have to be able to iterate, which is the heart of design thinking.
Right.
And if you can bring your courage to the place where you can iterate with your career, I think those are the folks that are going to find that elusive concept of work-life balance, work-life alignment, which is my preference as to what to call it. Right.
Yeah. Work-life integration. I talked to somebody else this week who prefers that expression. So everybody's got their sort of favorite twist on work-life balance.
I don't even know what my favorite is anymore. I just figured out a long time ago that it's not like a teeter-totter.
Right.
You know, we're never at full balance for more than a few seconds. And so what we have to do is change keep the amplitude small on the teeter-totter and be able to shift.
And it's not an either or thing. I mean, in past episodes, I've talked with people about the Apple TV show Severance, right? You come into work, you forget your personal life, you leave work, you forget your work life. It's like, it's not that simple.
That's like one of my favorite quotes in the book comes from a mentor of mine, personal and professional. It's all one life. What you do with it's up to you.
Yeah.
It's one thing. So.
Yeah, it's very true. So the first of those is discernment. So what are the types of things that we need to be discerning for ourselves as we progress through our careers?
The kinds of discernment questions I put forward are built on sort of the traditional values review. You know, what matters? What are the values that you hold close? I phrase the question different. The question for me that's at the core of this whole model is what matters the most to you right now at this season of your life, right now.
Yep.
And in the discernment section, I talk about asking yourself that question first and figuring out who the people are around you that will be impacted by your choices and assessing what matters to them. Sometimes you actually ask them what matters to them and have them make their own list. And sometimes if they're young children or aging parents or people you're caretaking or your friends, you might not go ask everybody to give you their list. But comparing notes about what matters to you, what matters to those people who have a stake in what you're going to decide is at the heart of this. Once you have a sense of that, I also encourage people to say, what matters to the organization you're working in or the one you're thinking about working in? What are their priorities? Not just the mission statement on the website, but what are they actually prioritizing their efforts around and their investments around and their culture around? And do those priorities line up with yours? Once you've asked about those three entities, yourself, your stakeholders, your organization, then the discernment question is, are there any misalignments between those three? If there aren't, then how do you want to grow where you are? Or do you want to move just for the sake of a new experience? If there are no misalignments, you're probably looking at how do I grow where I am? If there are misalignments, then the question is, what are you ready, willing, and able to do about that? And that brings you to the place where you either can make a move within the organization or beyond it, or you have to decide how you're going to thrive or sustain yourself until you can make a change. Those are the discernment questions. I call them the hip pocket questions. You can write them on an index card and carry them in your wallet and pull them out. I have often imagined my experience of the day of 9/11 was found in a way that we have time. I'm happy to share the story with you, but I wanted something I could pull out of my wallet when the next big crisis happened. And I'm watching the, Chiron on the news feed going, okay, the world just shifted. What matters to me now? The short version of that story is I was the dean of students for a medical school that morning. And I had students coming to my office saying, I used to work on Wall Street. I don't belong here anymore. I'm going home and I won't come back. I had students who were Muslim who were trying to get to their families and be with them. I had students who were military who said, I'm going to be called up. I don't know what's next. And I just, in a microcosm of about 6 hours that day, I watched this mass of humanity try to struggle with what matters now, because it all just changed.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the early sparks for my thinking. I won't say I was ready to write a book that day, but it was a spark.
What have you found in the course of your coaching that people are afraid to ask themselves in this discernment process?
It's a really good question. I think I have two answers. One is not what they're afraid of, but what they're surprised by.
Okay.
And then I'll tell you the question I think is most challenging for people. The thing that surprises them is I ask people to make a top 10 list of the things that matter. And my only requirement is that it must include some personal and some professional things. It doesn't matter what the ratio is. You know what that list is, but it has to have both. And then I have them come back and just tell me what they learned. They can share their list if they want to, but they don't have to. I just ask what you learned. And the thing that surprises almost everyone who does that exercise is that the top 3, 5, 7 items have nothing to do with work.
Mm-hmm.
They're personal. And there are seasons in people's lives where it's all professional all the time, and it has to be. But for most of the people who find their way to me, they're surprised by that. Then the thing that challenges them is, what are you ready, willing, and able to do about misalignment? And I don't think my clients are afraid to ask that, but the answers to those questions are hard. And so it's hard to go there. Fear is not usually part of it, but boy, they need a little bit of time to pass while they cook with that question before they can start thinking about it.
I mean, certainly the misalignment between what you want and what the people around you, your stakeholders, might want. I mean, I wrote an article recently about, I called it, "Do you have a case of the should do's?" Right. And, I think for a lot of people, particularly people who are younger in their careers, but also people who have families that they feel like they have to support, and they end up doing things that they feel like it becomes more of an obligation than what they really want to do. And, they end up sort of sacrificing themselves a bit in the process of honoring their stakeholders. And I won't say that's the wrong answer. I just think, a lot of people really wrestle with that misalignment. And obviously there's the misalignment as well between, like, I'd love to do this, but I need to make money, which is kind of the environment misalignment. And, the alignment questions, I'm sure, are very difficult for people, as you say.
I do want to speak to the one issue that you just brought up, which is the sacrificing what matters to you for the sake of others or for the sake of making a living, which is kind of saying, got to take care of those around me. I don't even think that's an either or question. If I hear people kind of either or-ing that question,
right,
I will say, what could you be doing right now while you're caring for those around you that would move you toward more of what matters to you when you can get there? And it's just opening the window to say, what could you do today that would get you 5% down the road? Doesn't mean you have to leave your job. Just because you're having these conversations or reading this book doesn't mean you have to uproot everything tomorrow. Iterative change that's intentional is usually incremental. I didn't mean for that to be alliterative. It's kind of weird the way I said it, but I have people look for small changes that will make them feel a little bit better. It gives people something to hope about and to latch on to and to practice.
Yeah.
If you're I have a lot of clients who are in this situation. They have kids at a particular stage in their education. Either they don't want to move them during middle school, or they have college tuition benefit and they're not going to give that up. So they're going to stay put till kids are through college. That doesn't have to be a time of martyrdom, right? And that's the either or thinking that I try to help people move through.
And then you talk about curveballs, that will come, I guess, despite whatever amount of discernment that you have done. What are some of the curveballs that, what forms might some of those curveballs take, positive or negative?
You bring up an important point. I think there are both kinds of curveballs. I used to say it would be a huge curveball for me if someone offered me a full-time, well-paying job on Fiji, because that might be my dream, but it would sure impact a lot of my stakeholders.
Yeah.
That would be, having your dream job in your dream place is a positive curveball. Having there be a global pandemic is a challenging curveball that nobody could have predicted. Having a toxic boss or hitting a ceiling, I've gone as far as I can go in this role or in this organization.
Yeah.
Those are all the kind of curveballs that are not necessarily positive feeling, but they're the kinds of things that people hit. And then they come to a coach saying, what do I do? What do I do? And that book was written for them.
So the second career challenge is around managing change. And, as we've talked about so far, I mean, with people more regularly changing jobs or even careers, getting good at managing change is becoming more and more important for us to master. So, given that, what do you see people struggle with in your coaching experience?
So in the book, I lay out a model for thinking about change visually and thinking about a cycle of change that we go through multiple times in our life. I think for my parents' generation, that would have been a foreign concept. There wasn't a cycle of change. There wasn't change. You stayed for 40 years and got your gold watch and your pension.
Right.
That's gone. And most of the people, unless they're of my generation or older, most of the people who land with me are aware that that doesn't exist anymore. The people who kind of came in on the tail end of that struggle with, I didn't think I'd ever have to change, and the world has gone weird around me, right? So that's one set of challenges. The other set of challenges comes on the front end. People know they're itching to change, but they don't know how. And that's the part of the process that I call search targeting. You're trying to figure out what you're looking for. And that actually is probably the hardest psycho-spiritually and intellectually for people. The rest of it's nuts and bolts, and there are techniques for interviewing and there are techniques for tracking how you're going to communicate and all of that. And I lay those out, but figuring out what you're looking for can come out of that discernment process. But sometimes people just get so overwhelmed by trying to narrow down their choices. And if there's a sense of urgency about the decision, like they've been downsized and they need to make money, that can be a really hard stage. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think you've given certainly examples of some of the things that people wrestle with. I mean, one of them that you cover in more detail in the book is the decision about, should I stay or should I go? And you have a framework, a 2x2 that you counsel people to use. Perhaps you could talk about that.
Be happy to do that. I have people draw 4-box grid, 2 columns, 2 rows. And on the top, you label the columns stay and go. And on the sides, you label the rows survive and thrive. And I lay out a description of what each of those quadrants looks like. And I ask people to just tell me where they think they are on that grid, and then draw an arrow to where they'd like to move. Many times I get clients who are in the stay and survive till the kids get old enough to move, or stay and survive till my spouse finishes their degree, or till I can find a job that fits my profile. So there's an element of figuring out what the stay and keep your head in the game looks like, and then what the move is. And it helps people realize that it's a staged process. You might today not be ready to walk out and just empty your desk and go to the parking lot and take your chances. There's a time period between even an urgent need to change and when you actually execute it. So what do you do in that stay period to at least survive professionally and physically, mentally, spiritually, socially? How do you keep all of that together while you're trying to make a move? That stay-go grid, sometimes people figure out that they're actually pretty happy. What they want to do is stay and thrive.
Yeah.
And we go looking for ways to thrive where you are. Sometimes it might be a new role or a new project. And if I can get people to say, I'm really in that stay and thrive place, I don't want to go anywhere. Nothing bad is happening, and I haven't gotten my dream job offer, so I don't have to go. That's the dream job is the go and thrive box on that grid. It's like, I got a great way to thrive. It's just not here, and I've got to make the transition. That's a different thing than I got to stay here till my boss retires or I get my kids out of school or whatever. So each of those boxes has a different set of challenges. I hope I'm not just rambling about that.
No, not at all. You bring the 4 E's into this too. You have a slightly different 4 E's than I've seen, but walk through yours and talk about how they play in.
All right. And I will not claim that mine are the only E's that matter. It's just 4 that seem to make sense in my coaching practice. I tell people that in any work situation, any professional situation, there are 4 kinds of things we can get from the job, sort of getting your goodies from the job.
Right.
One is you can be learning new skills or new things. That's education. Might not be formal education, but you're learning. The second is experience, a chance to practice new things that you've learned about, but you're actually having to do them. The third is exposure, being seen doing those new things, that visibility piece that helps you network and move toward perhaps a new opportunity. But exposure matters. And the fourth is probably one of the more important ones. It's enthusiasm. Do you still want to get up and get out of bed and go do that job today? Most of us rarely have all four for more than a few days at a time. So I don't coach people to go try to get all four and keep them. But if you have zero, it's probably time to look at that stay-go grid. If you have one or two, the question is that enough for staying and thriving? And what do you need to add to get a little more of the ones you don't have? If you have to stay, that's a way I have that conversation about staying, is what could you go get of the 4 E's that would either boost your morale or prepare you for when you're ready to go? And it's just a way to help people think about not every career decision is an uprooting or a changing jobs or quitting, or sometimes it's intentionally planning to grow.
When you've made that decision, right, you've gone through whatever process of getting to the stay or go decision, and you decide that you need to go find your next role or your next career. What are the key steps in that process from your perspective, and which ones do people skip to their peril?
I think it's really interesting that people almost don't enter searches until one of two things happens. They're forced to because they lost a job for whatever reason, or it's either being pushed or being pulled. Somebody gives you an offer, an opportunity to apply to something.
Right.
And I think there's a step in between or before you get to that. And that is saying, if I were going to go, where geographically do I want to be? And I give people the task of going and buying a US map or a world map if they're so inclined. And 2 colors of markers, usually red and green, is what I suggest. And I say, put a big red X through any part of the world you don't want to live in. Put a green circle around places you're curious about. If you have a significant other, have them get their own map and do the same thing, and then lay them on top of each other. And come up with the geography first, because that's about lifestyle. That's about who you are as a human. And then say, well, what is it? What's the work that I want to do? That's where the 4 E's come in, right? What is the work that I want to do to make a difference in the world, or to have an impact in the world, or to just make a living? And then you say, who in those green circled areas has jobs like that? And if I don't know, how can I find out? That's the homework that I think people skip the intentional piece of. And using that framework for people who are kind of in that search targeting phase, I'll ask them to go through that exercise and spend some time with it, and sometimes several weeks or a few months if they're not in an urgent situation.
One of my colleagues talks about, going slow to go fast, not rushing right into the, throwing 1,000 applications out there and seeing what comes back. I think even if you're reasonably certain about what you want to do next, which, in some cases you are, right? Mm-hmm. You should still take a little bit of time to step back and reflect and stew on it enough to make sure, right? Mm-hmm. So that you don't end up spending a lot of time and energy, looking for something that you then get into and say, nah, this really wasn't what I thought it would be, and I need to find something new again.
I think that's really an important point. And I've seen people expend a lot of energy in searches, and it's a grueling process if you're being planful about it. And I've had people come who've done 5, 7, 10 job interview cycles, and they haven't found the right fit yet. And for those people, I say, let's step back and just let's do some search targeting. What is it you really want? And what's kept those things that you've experienced from being the right fit for the organization or for you? And I push them to kind of dig into what they learned by expending all that energy before they keep expending energy.
Well, we won't have time to go more into detail on that, but I would just say to the audience, there was a ton of great job search advice covered in that part of the book. So I leave our audience with that. And let's cover the third one, which is, basically about lifelong context. Let's start with the obvious. Careers are long. They're getting longer. Life expectancy is increasing. How does that affect how we should be thinking about the arc of our careers over our lifetime?
Well, I think this is one of the places where that societal look at work is shifting. Now, I mean, in my parents' era, you had one job and you stayed with it. And if you didn't, you were flighty, right? And you were there's something wrong with you. Now, the average adult can expect to have 12 jobs and maybe as many as 3 or 4 careers.
Right.
And when I say that to a baby boomer like me, they kind of recoil, right?
Right.
And our younger colleagues get it. They're like, well, yeah, I've already had 5 jobs and I'm 30. And if the next one doesn't get me where I want to go in 2 or 3 years, I'm going. They're already intentional. They could write the next edition of this book, but sometimes helping them harness that energy for being willing to change and giving them some tools is why I really want to hear that generation's take on this book. So if I think about lifelong context, there is an arc. If your arc's 40 years long and you retire and go fly fishing for the rest of your life, that's great. That's an arc. If your arc is to be a serial entrepreneur with your career and do a new career every 5 to 7 years and keep moving toward things that matter to you, that's a different arc, but it's still an arc.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing is to know that there is a trajectory. Figure out what your ideal trajectory is based on what matters to you, right? I probably grew up with the idea that there ought to be a long career. I mean, I was told in medicine, society's invested in your education. You owe them at least 40 years to practice and pay back what they invested in you. And that was a model that came out of sort of the greatest generation of people older than me. And I don't think it applies in medicine or most any career anymore. Talking to some legal colleagues who said, the young folks come in and they just want 3 years with a white shoe firm so they can soak up all the learning, and then they're going to go do what they want and have a lifestyle career.
Yeah.
And of course, the old gray-haired people like me go, how could they do that? Don't they know they owe, there's longevity that they need to do? And the young folks are saying, no, I don't think so. That's not the deal I'm buying into. So whatever your arc is, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to the cycle. End of a cycle doesn't mean the end of work or the end of meaning or the end of money or the end of life. It just means you're closing out a chapter. And that's what that last section is about. Is here's the arc of the chapters. Whether you have a 5-year career in X and a 7-year career in Y and a 20-year career in Z because you finally built your own business, or whether you stay at something for 40 years, there's still a set of things you have to go through. You're learning the ropes. You're figuring out how to be successful. Then you're being recognized for your success. And then you're building your legacy. And then you're planning for the next thing, whether that's fly fishing for the rest of your life or going and starting a business. And that section of the book is meant to give people that context. And I don't hear many people talking about that right now. So I'll try to contribute to that conversation.
I don't see a lot out there on the notion of the arc of your career. I mean, there's Designing Your Life. There's Clay Christensen kind of did write a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? Marshall Goldsmith has one, The Earned Life. So, I mean, they are out there, right? But I think, this idea of like, what do you do in retirement? I don't think there's a lot of books on, because the whole definition is changing and it's changing rapidly. And, whether you want to work or need to work, but don't want to do it full time, there are more options available to you than I think used to be the case. And that's an interesting space, for our generation that's hitting that point, right? And what they want to do. Do they want to go fly fishing or do they want to start a company? Do they want to do coaching part-time, whatever it is?
You're absolutely right. And I think on some level, this is a book for those of us who didn't grow up thinking we had choices. But in some ways, it's a bridge to our younger colleagues who figured this out and can teach us how to actually be entrepreneurial and intentional at the same time. I really hope that this is a bridge across generations. It's not written for boomers. It's not written for people who are at the end of their career or the middle. It's written for the lifespan and to create conversation amongst us across the lifespan.
You talk about creating a capstone plan in this part of the book. What do you mean by a capstone plan?
Others might call it a retirement plan. It's an invitation to plan for what you want at the end of this cycle in your career. It might be planning how to go fly fish and live in Montana for the rest of your life. It might be planning for how to do that 2 months out of the year while you have an encore career. It might be planning for working enough to supplement your retirement, but have a lot of flexibility in your schedule. One of the big challenges I see with people in their mid to senior careers is they haven't thought about that. Particularly in medicine, but in many professions, the identity for the individual is tied up so much in what their title is and what their
Yes.
profession is. It's really an invitation to plan beyond that one identity. Think about what you want your life to look like and who's in it. And you want to spend your time. I can't tell you how many people I know who didn't do that, particularly in medicine, and they struggle.
I'm watching friends start to retire, and, some of them have very clear plans and others just want to not work anymore. Right. And, you're going to hit a wall at some point, I think, if you don't really have a good plan for how you want to spend that time. I've certainly heard that from my contemporaries who have hit that wall.
So have I. And I've seen some people do it really well by saying, I'm going to take 6 months, and I'm going to sleep as long as I want and go to the movies in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
But I need a plan for 6 months from now. 6 months is enough of that. I've seen people with no plan who really spent a couple of years spinning their wheels with at least angst, if not depression.
Yeah.
And really get paralyzed by it. That capstone plan in this book is really an invitation to think ahead so that you don't get there and fall off a cliff mentally or psychologically or spiritually.
Let's spend the last few minutes just talking about your earlier career. So you got your medical degree. How did you decide to go to rural downstate Illinois and practice rural medicine?
I grew up there.
Okay.
The only physician to date in my family, not the only doctoral degree, but I went to a medical school that was part of a group of schools built in the late 60s and early 70s to actually be based for the community that they were built in. And the mission of my school was to create physicians to serve the population of Central and Southern Illinois. And I went and did what I was supposed to do. I had a wonderful time. I took care of people that I'd known for years. I took care. The night before my practice opened, my childhood babysitter, my best friend and her parents, and one of the nurses I knew from the hospital helped me paint the trim in the office the night before we opened for the first patient. You don't have those experiences today if you don't go to a very small place. I had a great experience, but I came out at a time when the pressures on private practice medicine were really high and pressures on solo primary care were very high.
Yes.
And I'm proud that I made it through 2.5 years of that. And then it was the first time I had to get really intentional and say, okay, I need a landing pad to extract from this. I'm not quitting medicine, but this is not tenable. And I made my next move as a way to have a landing pad.
Yeah.
I ended up staying at that institution for 10 years and moving from clinical work to academic and clinical work. And none of that was planned, but at the moment it was intentional, right?
Yeah.
It was still reactive, but it was intentional.
You spent some time along the way in Akron, Ohio, which is where I am from.
Ah, okay. Yes. So mid-career, I went back to school and got training in public health and preventive medicine. And from there, I got recruited to follow in the footsteps of somebody that I think is a giant public health, Dr. Bill Peck. He retired as a department chair of a Department of Community Health. And that idea of serving a community was what had really resonated for me at mid-career. And I got a chance to be the department chair. I always told him, I still do to this day, I can't fill your shoes, Bill, but I'd be happy to follow in your footsteps. And I got to spend some time there at a community-based medical school, working with public health, preventive medicine, family medicine. It was just a really rewarding place. I am not born for snow, and I needed to move south. So we got the chance. I had done my mid-career retraining at Carolina. We talked about that earlier in the show. And we really liked it here in the Triangle and decided that's where we would retire. So I wasn't ready to quit working or quit medicine or academia yet. But I told my family, let's get where you want to be because you don't like to move.
Yeah.
And I'll finish out my career here. And that's what we've done and I'm continuing to do.
Well, I can remember having grown up in that area during the sort of tail end of the sort of industrial age of that part of the U.S.
Yes.
And then going to school down at Duke in North Carolina. And the first week I was there, I looked up at the sky and said, so that's what a blue sky looks like. Because it was just never that blue. There was always a bit of haze, even on a perfectly sunny day. And in Ohio, and it's probably better now than it used to be. But, it just was like, wow, that's a really blue sky. I've never seen anything like that before.
Yes. Well, I came to Akron after that transition had happened. It was a real devastating transition for the area.
Sure.
I'm sure it made the skies clearer, but it was an economically challenging transition. And coming down here, you know what they say about the sky down here. If God weren't from UNC, the sky wouldn't be Carolina blue. I had to work that in somehow, but
don't push it.
Okay, I'll back up. It really is a beautiful area. I will say that one of the most beautiful campuses I've ever been on is Duke, and I had a wonderful time at Duke.
They're both beautiful campuses. They really are.
They are. And it's a great area to be. We're happy here. But we got here, that idea of getting out the map came from what happened in my family when I said, where do you want to live? And my wife said, I'm not making this decision alone. You make your list, I'll make mine. And it turned out that our top 3 were the same, in the same order. And the triangle was at the top. So that made life easy,
It did make life easy. Yeah. So last question that I usually ask people, what's one thing you wish someone had pulled you aside and told you at the beginning of your career journey?
I think it is that every decision you make prepares you for the next thing that comes along, whether that's a new job or whether that's a world crisis or whether it's getting the dream opportunity of a lifetime. Everything you've done to date will make you ready for that if you pay attention. And the whole book is about paying attention.
Yeah.
And being willing to have the courage to say, does matter right now.
It's a good way to close. Yeah. Thank you for doing the show with me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. It's great to meet you.
You as well. And you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
I want to thank Sharon for joining me today to discuss her book, Professional Careers by Design, and a little bit about her own career journey as well there right at the end. If you'd like to focus more on your career journey, visit pathwise.io and become a member. Basic membership is free. You can also sign up on the website for the Pathwise newsletter. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Career Sessions, Career Lessons. We hope the nuggets of wisdom shared today help guide your path to the successful career of your dreams. This podcast series is part of Pathwise.io, which is here to help you live the career you want. We provide a comprehensive mix of career and professional development events, insights, tools, and exercises backed by a group of leading coaches and other career management experts. If you aspire to something more or just something different in your career, join us at Pathwise.io. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. See you again on the next episode.